It's perfectly normal to find your social preferences changing as you get older. Many individuals in their 60s, 70s, and 80s experience a shift where they start to withdraw from social circles that once held significant importance. This isn't necessarily due to a lack of caring or becoming cold-hearted. Rather, it often stems from a profound internal transformation rooted in wisdom gained through life experiences, the weight of past betrayals. As we journey through life, we accumulate not only cherished memories, but also emotional scars. Some of these wounds are minor, easily forgotten disagreements or misunderstandings. However, others leave deeper imprints, betrayals, rejections, and moments when we opened our hearts only to be met with dismissal or misuse. With age, the quiet echoes of these past hurts become more pronounced. We become less inclined to freely offer ourselves not out of anger, but from the realization that not everyone deserves unrestricted access to our lives. Consider Eleanor, an 81-year-old woman who once delighted in hosting weekly dinner parties. Her home was filled with laughter, music, and the vibrant energy of friends and acquaintances. However, as the years passed, her social landscape began to shift. Friends drifted apart, one betrayed a confidence, and another disappeared after the passing of her husband. It wasn't a single monumental heartbreak, but rather a gradual accumulation of small disappointments. Now, Eleanor finds herself cherishing solitude over company, not because she dislikes people, but because she values the serenity of peace over the superficiality of pretense. In the later stages of life, a protective instinct often emerges, a metaphorical shell formed from accumulated experiences. While it may not always feel pleasant, it often feels necessary for self-preservation. Having witnessed the fickleness of human nature and the ease with which people can change or depart, we begin to safeguard our time, our hearts, and our trust. This isn't about adopting a cold or callous demeanor. It's about exercising caution and discernment. Older adults have often loved deeply, given generously, and experienced the sting of being let down without warning. This recurring pattern teaches them to pause, evaluate, and withdraw when a situation feels unsafe or insincere. They become attuned to subtle cues, paying attention not only to what people say, but also to how they make them feel after the interaction has ended. Psychologists refer to this phenomenon as relational fatigue, where the emotional cost of maintaining connections begins to outweigh the inherent joy derived from them. This is particularly prevalent among individuals who have weathered significant emotional storms. There's no shame in experiencing relational fatigue. It simply signifies a life fully lived, with exposure to both the good and the bad that humanity has to offer. When distance is chosen, it's not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. It's the recognition that, at this stage of life, one's heart is a sacred space, and not everyone is entitled to access it. The craving for peace over small talk. In younger years, we may have readily tolerated inconsequential chatter, conversations filled with pleasantries, gossip, or idle talk, merely for the sake of filling the silence. However, as we mature, our tolerance for such superficiality wanes. This isn't indicative of antisocial tendencies. Rather, it reflects a growing understanding of the profound value of peace and tranquility. Silence no longer feels empty or unsettling. Instead, it becomes a source of nourishment and rejuvenation. Once this sense of inner quiet is discovered, it becomes increasingly difficult to relinquish it for the sake of shallow companionship. Consider Harold, a 76-year-old former salesman. He was known for his charm, outgoing personality, and ability to strike up a conversation with anyone. However, he now actively avoids social events that necessitate endless mingling and superficial interactions. He rarely attends large family gatherings unless he genuinely feels up to it. When asked why, he simply states, "I'm tired of talking just to talk." His preference isn't for isolation, but for meaning, honesty, and quiet moments that don't require him to perform or put on a facade. As we age, our emotional energy becomes an increasingly precious resource. The desire to impress others diminishes, and the urge to constantly prove ourselves fades away. In their place arises a longing for authenticity, a desire for interactions that feel genuine and unrehearsed. If such interactions cannot be found, many would prefer to remain at home with a good book and a cup of tea than to engage in social gatherings that leave them feeling lonelier than they were before. This isn't about being standoffish or aloof. It's about being selective and discerning. There's a certain dignity in consciously choosing one's surroundings and the people with whom we share them. We've earned the right to conserve our energy, prioritize peace, and decline invitations without feeling guilt or obligation. This isn't avoidance, it's a sign of maturity and self-awareness. The more we embrace this kind of discernment, the more we realize that a rich and fulfilling life doesn't necessarily require a large crowd. Sometimes, a single meaningful conversation or even a quiet evening spent alone can be far more gratifying than hours of forced interaction. If you've been withdrawing from social engagements lately, opting out of idle banter, and skipping noisy gatherings, know that you're not becoming cold or detached. You're simply becoming clearer about what truly fills you up and what drains your energy. This clarity is one of the most valuable gifts of aging. The feeling that people don't understand you anymore. There often comes a point in life when we look around and realize that the world has undergone significant changes, and so have we. The slang is different, the values are different, and the pace of everything, conversations, expectations, and even relationships, feels almost dizzying. Amidst all this change, we may begin to feel invisible, unheard, or simply out of place. This isn't necessarily due to any wrongdoing on our part, but rather because others no longer take the time to understand our perspectives and where we're coming from. Consider Marie, a 79-year-old retired schoolteacher. She once enjoyed sharing stories from her life with her younger relatives, recounting her experiences raising 5 children, managing a household, working full-time, and still finding time to volunteer. However, she now laments that they rarely ask her questions. When she does speak, they nod politely while simultaneously checking their phones. This isn't done maliciously, but it creates a sense of disconnect. Over time, this gap begins to feel like an insurmountable canyon. This is one of the more subtle reasons why people begin to withdraw from social interactions. It's not that they no longer care about others, but rather that being in environments where they don't feel truly heard becomes emotionally exhausting. Consequently, they start to prefer their own company, not because it's inherently superior, but because it provides a sense of safety and understanding. We are acutely aware of our own depth of feeling, the breadth of our experiences, and the wisdom we've accumulated over the years. However, when others fail to recognize or acknowledge these qualities, it becomes easier to simply stop offering them. This type of loneliness isn't about being physically alone, it's about feeling misunderstood and unseen. We may be surrounded by people, yet feel completely isolated and disconnected. We share a thought, and they abruptly change the subject. We express a concern, and they dismiss it as being overly dramatic. After enduring enough of these experiences, we may begin to believe that silence is the easier option. Psychologists refer to this as emotional invalidation, where our feelings are subtly dismissed or minimized. This is a common experience among older adults, yet it's rarely discussed openly. It doesn't manifest as outright rejection, but rather as a series of small, dismissive moments that accumulate over time. However, it's important to remember that our thoughts still matter, and our voices still hold power. Just because others fail to hear us doesn't diminish our inherent value. It simply means that we've outgrown certain conversations and social circles, and that's perfectly acceptable. Sometimes the solution isn't to force our way into their world, but to seek out people or places where we don't have to constantly explain ourselves, where our mere presence is enough, and where someone genuinely listens rather than simply waiting for their turn to speak. When those people and places are few and far between, it's natural to withdraw, protect our energy, and find solace in our own space. In that space, we are fully seen and understood by ourselves, and that is never something to be ashamed of. The fear of becoming a burden. As we age, a quiet fear often begins to take root. The fear of becoming a burden to the people we love. It's a fear that's difficult to articulate, yet impossible to ignore. We don't want to disrupt someone's busy day. We don't want to ask for help, even when we desperately need it. And so, we remain silent. We stay at home, and we maintain our distance. This isn't driven by pride or arrogance, but rather by love, dignity, and a desire to avoid imposing on others. We start declining invitations, not because we don't want to attend, but because we don't want someone to feel obligated to pick us up or accommodate our needs. We hesitate to share our worries, not because we don't trust them, but because we don't want to weigh them down with our problems. Consequently, our world gradually begins to shrink. Consider Frank, an 84-year-old widower who used to spend weekends with his daughter's family. As his mobility declined, he found himself declining their invitations more frequently. When asked why, he explained, "I don't want them rearranging their lives around me. They've got kids, jobs. I'll just slow them down." Despite his family's repeated assurances that he was always welcome, the fear of becoming a burden overshadowed his desire for connection. This is the paradox that so many older adults face. The more they need others, the less they want to need them. The more they value relationships, the more they hesitate to reach out because they've spent a lifetime being strong, being the caregiver, being the one others leaned on. Now asking for help feels unfamiliar, perhaps even shameful. This fear is rooted in a deeply human desire, the longing to be loved not out of duty or obligation, but out of genuine affection and delight. When we sense that our presence might be causing inconvenience or hardship, we tend to retreat, preferring to be alone rather than feel like a burden. However, it's crucial to remember that people who truly love us want to be there for us. They may not always express it perfectly, and they may not always handle it flawlessly, but our worth isn't measured by our independence. It's measured by our presence and the unique contribution we bring to their lives. If the people around us genuinely care, our needs will never be perceived as a burden, but rather as an opportunity to demonstrate their love and support. Despite this truth, The fear often lingers, shaping our behavior and influencing our decisions. We stay quiet when we long to speak, we stay put when we yearn to visit, and we stay behind when we desperately want to join in. Gradually, avoiding people becomes easier than risking the discomfort of needing them. The quiet ending of old connections. Some relationships don't end with dramatic confrontations or tearful farewells. They simply fade away over time. People grow in different directions, priorities shift, and life pulls us apart in slow, almost imperceptible ways. We don't intentionally set out to drift apart, but it happens nonetheless. One day, we wake up and realize that the people who once filled our calendars are no longer a part of our daily lives. This isn't always a cause for sadness. Sometimes it's a peaceful and natural transition. However, at other times, it leaves a lingering ache, as if we've outgrown something we once deeply cherished. We reflect on the shared lunches, the late-night phone calls, and the laughter-filled moments, and we wonder where it all went. Did they change? Did we change? Perhaps both? Consider Ruth, a 73-year-old woman who used to take weekly walks with her best friend from high school. Over time, those walks became monthly, then yearly, and then eventually ceased altogether. There was no falling out, no bitter argument, just a quiet realization that they no longer had much to say to each other. Their lives had diverged, leading them down different paths with different interests and different rhythms. As Ruth aptly put it, "We still care about each other, but I think we've said all we needed to say." This experience is far more common than people realize. Relationships built on shared seasons of life, raising children together, working in the same office, living in close proximity, often don't survive when those seasons come to an end. As we move into the later stages of life, we may find ourselves surrounded by people who no longer resonate with who we are becoming. This isn't a sign of failure or inadequacy. It's simply a natural part of growth and evolution. When we begin to prioritize our time and energy, we inevitably become more selective about who we choose to spend it with. This isn't because we believe we're better than them, but because we have a clearer understanding of our own needs and desires. Sometimes we simply need space. Space to think, space to reflect, and space to simply be. Old friends who once energized us may now feel draining. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly may now feel forced and stilted. Rather than forcing the connection, we choose distance, not out of malice or resentment, but out of self-respect and a desire to protect our own well-being. The joy of your own company. At some point in life, we stop seeking the validation of crowds and start savoring the tranquility of solitude. This isn't born out of bitterness or loneliness, but rather from a profound realization that too many people never grasp. Our own company is enough. There's a certain kind of peace that settles over us when we realize that we don't have to constantly explain ourselves, entertain anyone, or pretend to be more or less than who we truly are. For years, we may have been surrounded by others due to work, family obligations, or social pressures. During those years, we may have rarely had a moment to simply be, to sit in stillness and listen to our own thoughts without interruption. Once we finally taste that freedom, it becomes something sacred, something to be protected and cherished. This isn't an escape from life, but rather an embrace of its deeper meaning. Consider Gerald, an 82-year-old man who once thrived on the social buzz. His house was the neighborhood gathering spot, and his voice was often the loudest in the room. However, In recent years, he finds more joy in watching birds from his porch than in hosting parties. When asked if he ever gets lonely, he smiles and says, "I've got enough stories in my head to keep me company for days." What he's discovered isn't loneliness, it's contentment. This shift often confuses those around us. They may worry about us, assuming that we're withdrawing out of sadness or despair. However, in truth, we're simply tuning into something deeper, a rhythm that's quieter but richer, a life that's less crowded but more fulfilling. We no longer feel the need to fill every silence, explain every choice, or be available to everyone at all times. This isn't avoidance, it's wisdom. It's the kind of inner clarity that comes only after years of navigating the noise of the world, giving generously to others, and stretching ourselves thin for the sake of external validation. Solitude, when chosen consciously, becomes a sanctuary, a place where healing happens, where reflection deepens, and where our truest self has the space to breathe and flourish. The older we get, the more we realize that some of our best days don't involve anyone else at all. We walk at our own pace, think our own thoughts, and do exactly as we please. For perhaps the first time in a long time, we feel truly free, not because the world has changed, but because we've finally claimed our space within it. In conclusion, pulling away from social circles as we age is a multifaceted experience influenced by past betrayals, a craving for peace, feeling misunderstood, fear of being a burden, the natural ending of old connections, and the discovery of joy in solitude. It's a journey of self-discovery and alignment with our authentic selves, and it's a testament to the wisdom and resilience gained through a life fully lived. We'd love to hear from you. What's one thing you've learned from this discussion, and how do you plan to use it in your life? Your thoughts are important, so don't hesitate to share them. If you found this discussion helpful, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue creating content that informs and inspires. Thanks for reading, and we look forward to connecting with you in the next video.